Vampires and zombies. Why the fever pitch?
James?
Well, let me tell you about. I don't know. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I'm not sure I quite understand the recurring every few years huge fan, and not just within the science fiction and science fantasy community, but just generally, the general public and fascination with both vampires and zombies. You go through these phases. Lost Boys, Buffy. Now it's every other show on TV and movies is a vampire thing. True Blood and Twilight and Vampire Diaries and everything in between. And now you have all the zombie ones as well. I've never quite understood the appeal. I mean, I enjoy a good story. If it's a good vampire film, I enjoy it. If it's a good zombie film, I enjoy it. But the concept in and of itself, I've never quite understood that. I think that the vampire thing, I mean, it's always struck me that the vampire thing has a bit of a dark sex appeal, especially to tweens and teens. That kind of bad guy, bad boy, or bad girl image is somehow very appealing to them, and I think that accounts for why a lot of those shows and films are more geared towards that age group. Zombie thing, man, I don't know. Somebody, you tell me.
The thing I find interesting about the zombie thing is, although vampire has successfully been in film and television, I can't really think of any successful zombie television. Zombies seems to.
Where do you go with that character development-wise?
Sleep stacks.
Well, yeah, watch infomercials at 3 in the morning, man.
Yeah, good point there. But I'm just saying, we'll know that we really crested that peak when you have some sort of zombie television thing out there. And again, maybe somebody out there knows, but for the life of me, I can think of 3 vampire things off the top of my head that were just there for vampires. But for zombies?
Even a soap
Well,
opera.
I mean, what do you expect? All they do is groan and eat people's brains.
But in the movies, they are incredibly. I mean, Zombie Planet. Just I want to see that. For some reason, the movies it works well. Maybe zombies are only good for 2 hours, and then we're done. And vampires are just endlessly fascinating. So I don't think we've actually crested on the zombie thing until you can actually make it work within the television.
Well, unless you're talking about the very first vampire movie, where the vampire looked like deathworm Dover, basically, creeping up on this poor woman in her bed, looking like a skeleton and so forth, compared to like the angel version of vampire, the sexy guy, the new series, I don't know the actor's name, in Vampire Diaries, hot.
The glow in the sunshine.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the angst of the living female and the vampire guy, or sometimes reverse. It depends on which show you're looking at. But I mean, there's the reason they're so popular, and believe me, I do not agree with any of this. The reasons why, because I'm tired of vampire stuff. But it's the sex appeal. It's strictly the forbidden love, the Romeo and Juliet,
Tame the monster.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and if you split the difference, and probably it's almost an unfair question, it should have been probably why the fever pitch on vampires, why the fever pitch on zombies. Probably predominantly the zombie audience is male, because zombies generally tend to get their bodies blown apart in all sorts of nasty ways. Whereas the Twilight was almost exclusively moms and daughters. So they're fever pitching simultaneously, which to me is interesting, because we've essentially now talked about the sort of emotional and the bonding and the romance and all of that. And we've also talked about a fever pitch of zombie movies, which are violent and explosive and everything. So the bigger question, or the macro question, I guess, is what is happening in society now that these two appealing things to the different sexes are both peaking now? Is it that males are feeling somehow inferior, that whole, metrosexual or emasculated thing, and so they love going to see movies where and somehow women are missing romance because romance is politically incorrect, and so if we're not allowed to do it in the workplaces and with our friends and everything, at least we can go see it in the movies, damn it.
It's escapism.
Well, it's always escapism. Why is it pitching now? What's going on in society now that maybe these things seem to be pitching? I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing it out.
Zombies seem to be big during wartime.
Aha! Tim the Soundman. Oh, and I forgot to introduce Tim the Soundman and cameraman Frank. That was Tim the Soundman. That's interesting. In wartime, so in feelings of insecurity. Eitan and I were once on a panel about why the fear of technology, and where does that come from? And it seems to me when technology starts to cusp like we are now with nanotechnology and stem cell research, and we don't know what's going on, that there's a sort of fear that comes with that, like, oh my God, you know, what's going to happen? And then that throws us into sorts of escapism, where the scientist is the bad guy or the boogeyman. So I'm wondering, is there a like parallel
It could
for
be the exact
zombies
opposite.
and or vampires?
It could be the exact opposite of that. When the new terror gets new and unknown and real, we like the old monsters. The old monsters are comfortable on one level or another.
You talk about prejudice towards one thing, and they say, well, then you're prejudiced against another thing. But with vampires, you can deal with it without having that problem.
Well, not necessarily, because if you look at the show Angel, if he falls in love, he becomes his evil side again.
Yeah.
And if he stays cursed, he's good, and he does things to help people. So, I mean, you have that dichotomy between the two different characters he plays, which can snap at any moment if he falls in love with somebody, and there's always that threat. So, I mean, you either look at the more modern vampire, which is a love interest, a sexy guy that the women are all swooning over, and you look at the one who's in angst over which part of his personality is he going to be portraying at any given time.
I remember, Eitan, you had, and if you can recall it for us, an interesting insight as to why vampires were suddenly becoming popular, or how they emerged as a popular figure in literature.
Well, vampires have never really gone away from us ever since the 1880s when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula.
No, not that one. The one with the minivan and the bus and the beach bunnies, but I'm just kidding. Go ahead. I have to do it. I'm his brother.
Yeah.
It's in the contract.
Anyways, you understand, the vampire, there's always been some form of blood-sucking creature out there, but it wasn't particularly popular or scary in modern mythology. And by modern, I mean in the past 2,000 years. The big scary creature was the werewolf, was the dryad, was the troll under the bridge. Look at Hansel and Gretel. All that scary crap's in the forest. Look at all the grim fairy tales. There ain't nothing in the city you really got to be afraid of. It's when you leave going to the country, the forest, the town, then all that crap's going to fall on your head. The problem is, by the 1880s, a great number of people, and all the influential people, and all the people making the news and doing stuff, didn't live in the little towns anymore. They lived in the city. And who'd give a crap about a werewolf in the city? If a werewolf showed up in a city, 10,000 people would show up and beat the living crap out of him. And the troll under the bridge, or the elf, or the dwarf, who cared? So you needed a new monster. And that's when Bram Stoker came along and gave us Dracula. And the vampire he created was the perfect urban monster. He dresses well, he talks well, he walks down the street, he goes into the restaurant, he will walk into your home, and he will greet you there. And because we are now an urban society, most of the other monsters go away, but the vampire just keeps staying with us. In some ways, the vampire gets stronger. Mummy? Alright, Brandon Fraser made a good movie. But compared to the vampire thing, not even close. Werewolves? Alright, I loved American Werewolf in London, Paris could have done without. But 15 vampire movies for almost every other monster movie that gets made. But the zombies are a subconscious nightmare. Zombies are what happen when everything falls apart. And we're always afraid, in the back of our mind, that everything's going to fall apart. From Omega Man, from Vincent Price doing it,
Mad Max.
all the way up to I Am Legend. We love the movies. Come on, what movie's coming out in November? I can't wait to see it. Where everything falls apart.
24/7?
That too. 2012. We love the disaster movies, but the zombie is our monster that makes everything fall apart. The vampire is the monster that lives with us in our cities at all times.
Well, the zombie keeps coming. You can shoot it, it keeps coming. You can cut it with a knife, it keeps coming, and crashing through the windows and the doors of your home. So yeah, it's a big part of fear and dealing with.
So, I think that goes a long way towards answering the question that I was thinking of, which is that, I guess with the economic stress that we're having, with the notion that, like Eitan said, somebody could take, a vial full of ricin, or however it's pronounced, and
Ricin.
ricin?
Yes.
Whatever.
Ricin.
And kill thousands of people with it, I guess,
Ricin.
some way or another. It's in the contract that you can only interrupt me 5 times. You've got 1 left. 2. Whatever. So maybe that's what this is answering. That there's economic uncertainty. There's the prospect of terrorism. They're busting these guys left and right, and everybody's afraid of another 9/11. So zombies work into that. That actually makes sense to me. And I think to what the Hare said, it also makes a certain amount of sense that a vampire can be politically incorrect for us. He takes his women. He does what he wants.
Or she.
Or she. And that almost fits into us needing to have something to express what we might be feeling inside but not be allowed to express outside. So, and there's certainly more of that PC now. Okay, well I guess we wrap that one up.